Most New Year's resolutions don't fail the way you think they do. They don't break in one dramatic moment of weakness, and they don't end with a grand emotional decision where you finally admit defeat and walk away. They disappear, quietly, slowly, almost politely. In fact, it happens so silently that you don't even realize it's occurring until one Tuesday afternoon you suddenly notice you haven't thought about that promise in 3 weeks. By then, the momentum is gone. The air has left the room, and it feels too late to bring it back. That silence is what actually hurts. Because when something fails loudly, when you crash and burn, at least you can point to a reason. But when it simply fades, it feels personal. It feels like something inside of you just stopped working. Again, it always begins with the same intoxicating ritual. We look at a new calendar, a fresh number, and feel a subtle sense that time itself is offering us a clean slate. Researchers call this the fresh start effect. It's the psychological phenomenon where temporal landmarks like New Year's Day, a birthday, or even a Monday allow us to delegate our past failures to a past self. We tell ourselves that the person who couldn't wake up early, or the person who couldn't save money, was the 2025 version of us. But today, we are new. The problem is that this is a biological hallucination. Your room looks the same. Your life looks the same. Your habits are still waiting for you exactly where you left them, like ghosts in the hallway. But inside, something shifts. There's a quiet hope, not a loud excitement, but a feeling that maybe this year you'll finally do what you said you would. Not perfectly, not dramatically, just consistently. You imagine yourself waking up with clarity, moving through the day with less resistance, and finally following through instead of negotiating with yourself at every step. For a short while, a few days, maybe 2 weeks, you live inside that story. You act differently. You move with intention. You feel a lightness because you are finally on the path. To understand why this feeling is a trap, we have to look at one of the most brutal survival stories in human history, the race to the South Pole in 1911. 2 explorers, Roald Amundsen and Robert Falcon Scott, led 2 separate teams with the exact same goal. It was a 400-mile round trip through the most unforgiving environment on Earth. Scott's team followed the strategy that most of us use for our New Year's resolutions. When the weather was good and the sun was shining, they would push themselves to the absolute limit, traveling 30, 40, or even 50 miles in a single day to take advantage of their motivation. But when the weather turned foul and the blizzards hit, they stayed in their tents, shivering and waiting for the feeling of progress to return. They relied on the intensity of the moment. Amundsen, however, followed a different rule. He mandated that his team would travel exactly 20 miles every single day, regardless of the conditions. On beautiful, clear days, when they felt they could go for 60 miles, he stopped them at 20. On days when the wind was howling and they wanted to stay in their sleeping bags, he forced them to march 20. He didn't care about the weather of his emotions. He cared about the mechanics of the 20-mile march. Amundsen's team reached the pole and returned safely, arriving on the exact day they planned. Scott's team, exhausted by the bursts of overexertion followed by long periods of stagnation, perished in the snow. They ran out of momentum because they let the external conditions, the motivation of the sun, dictate their pace. We do the same thing every January. We try to march 60 miles on the sunny days of the first week. And then we perish in the tents when the cold reality of February hits. Then, without warning, something small happens. You stay up a little later than planned. You skip a routine just once. You choose what feels familiar instead of what you promised yourself you'd do. Nothing breaks. Nothing collapses. But something shifts. The effort feels heavier. The excitement softens. The story you were telling yourself loses a little bit of its power. Most people assume this is where failure begins. They think they are lazy, or weak, or incapable of discipline. But that's not what's actually happening. You aren't failing because of a mistake. You are failing because of something much more human. Your brain does not understand the concept of a new year. It doesn't recognize clean slates or symbolic resets. Those ideas matter to your conscious mind, but not to the primitive parts of your brain whose only job is to keep things predictable and safe. To your mind, change, even positive change, is a form of uncertainty. And uncertainty throughout human evolution has always felt dangerous. Waking up earlier disrupts your familiar rhythm. Changing your diet changes how your body feels. New habits introduce outcomes your brain cannot fully predict yet. So, instead of stopping you with a loud no, your mind does something far more effective. It negotiates. It speaks to you calmly, reasonably, almost kindly. It says, "You don't have to do this perfectly. Missing one day won't matter. You've had a stressful week. You can always start again on Monday." The danger isn't that these thoughts are wrong. It's that they sound logical. They don't feel like self-sabotage. They feel like you are finally understanding yourself. This is why resolutions die. They don't die from resistance. They die from permission, permission to delay, permission to soften the rules, permission to be flexible until there is nothing left to follow. This fade is accelerated because January is an honest month. December is a performance. It's filled with lights, social validation, and the constant stimulation of the holidays. It is incredibly easy to ignore what isn't working in your life when there is music playing and people around. But then January arrives. The decorations come down. The messages stop. The world slows down into a cold, gray stillness. And suddenly, you are alone with yourself again. Your patterns, your routines, and the very things you promised to change are no longer hidden behind distractions. They are right in front of you. Once the initial excitement wears off, the truth remains. Making a resolution means admitting that something about your life isn't working. That is uncomfortable. So, the mind looks for relief. Not long-term relief, but immediate relief. And in the human brain, immediate relief almost always looks like familiarity. The same behaviors, the same patterns, the same comfort, even when that comfort is the very thing you said you wanted to escape. This is where we misunderstand ourselves the most. We think we want change. But what we actually want is the feeling of change, the dopamine hit of the start, the rush of the potential. Real change doesn't feel like that. Most of the time, real change feels quiet, repetitive, and deeply unremarkable. It feels like doing the same small thing again, especially on the days when no one notices and nothing feels different yet. Motivation is emotional, but change is mechanical. Motivation is loud, but change is boring. And boredom is something the modern mind avoids at all costs. We live in an era of the quick fix. We are conditioned to expect a 12-week transformation or a one-hack solution to our problems. But your brain is a machine built on evidence, not on promises. If you have spent 10 years being a person who hits the snooze button, a single calendar flip isn't going to erase that neural pathway. You are fighting against years of biological momentum. Another reason the fade happens is that we build our resolutions on future versions of ourselves that don't exist yet. We imagine a version of us who has more energy, more discipline, and more clarity, but we don't change the environment that created our current behavior. We have the same phone filled with the same distracting apps. We have the same stress at work. We have the same triggers in our kitchen. When old habits return, we take it personally. We see it as proof that something is wrong with us. But it isn't. It's just consistency. The mind follows what it knows until the cost of the old habit becomes higher than the risk of the new one. Furthermore, we often let our resolutions carry too much weight. We don't just try to walk for 20 minutes. We try to become a fit person. These big identity labels sound powerful, but they create immense pressure. Pressure doesn't create consistency. It creates avoidance. When the goal becomes a part of your identity, every failure to meet that goal becomes a crisis of self. So, to protect your ego, your mind looks for an exit. It stops mentioning the resolution. It lets it slip into the background until it's gone. And what's strange is how little emotion comes with that realization. No anger. No disappointment, just a quiet acceptance that this is how it always goes. But that story isn't true. What's true is simpler. You're human. Your mind is designed for efficiency and comfort, not transformation. Expecting your life to change just because the year did is like expecting gravity to take a break. The people who actually change don't rely on January. They don't wait for motivation, and they certainly don't chase excitement. They build systems that don't require belief, only repetition. A system is a bridge. If you want to be a writer, the system is sitting in a chair at 8:00 a.m. Whether you write a masterpiece or a grocery list doesn't matter. What matters is the act of sitting. The system outsmarts the negotiator because it removes the need for a decision. You don't have to decide to work out if your gym bag is already in the car. You don't have to decide to eat healthy if the junk food isn't in the house. If your resolution already feels heavier than it did a few weeks ago, that doesn't mean you failed. It just means the novelty wore off. The story is over, and the real work has begun. It's not the kind of work that feels inspiring. It's the kind that feels ordinary. Real change looks boring from the outside. There are no announcements, no dramatic resets, just quiet consistency. Maybe this year doesn't need a complete reinvention. Maybe it just needs fewer promises and more awareness of the moments where your mind asks you to stay comfortable. Because that's where change actually lives. Not in January, not in motivation, but in those quiet moments when no one is watching and you choose to continue even without the excitement. You choose to act differently, even when you feel exactly the same. The fade only wins if you let the silence continue. So, if you've stopped, start again. Not with a grand gesture, but with a single, boring, mechanical step. Real change happens when you stop waiting for the feeling of being ready and start doing the work of being present. It is not a sprint. It is a slow, quiet, and persistent crawl toward the person you know you can be. And almost always, it happens without a sound.